I have never played Graveyard Keeper, and I'm attempting to finish the whole game. Over the next 100 days, you are about to see the first installment of this journey. And let me tell you, this game is somehow both hilariously funny and weirdly wacky all at the same time. Not to mention, I'm also playing with all of the DLC included, so make sure to keep an eye out for revolutionary donkeys and Inquisition refugee camps. If you do want to see another 100 days after this one, then make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I know you want more. Also, you should join my Discord server. We do lots of fun stuff over there like giveaways and competitions, so go check it out. And without further ado, sit back, relax, and let's get into the video. Life was going pretty well. I was picking up some milk from Gary and making my way home to the love of my life when all of a sudden reality came to a screaming halt, and I found myself face to face with a mysterious looking man. I asked if I was dead. He replied saying I'd be a graveyard keeper. Sounds about right. I protested, but I was told to dig up someone named Jerry, and I woke up in what will be my new home for the foreseeable future. I ventured outside and dug up Jerry only to find out that he's a talking skull. A talking skull with amnesia and an alcohol problem, as you'll soon find out. We heard a bell ring, and Jerry remembered enough to lead me down a path past my house where I found a donkey. A communist donkey who can not only talk, but will be delivering dead bodies to me via his cart. We're 2 minutes in. What is this game? But there's no time for questions. Jerry told me to grab that juicy fresh corpse, and we quickly headed into the morgue. He instructed me to drop the corpse onto the table, so I hesitantly obliged. I performed my first autopsy and removed the flesh from the corpse, much to my very real disgust. But nonetheless, I hauled the body over to the nearby graveyard and learnt about the burial system. So I prepared a spot for poor Jeff here, chucked him in and said my goodbyes. I received a burial certificate for my efforts and Jerry was going on about beer, but we were interrupted by the arrival of the bishop. The rude ass told me that the graveyard wasn't looking very nice, which I took quite personally, but he showed me how I can improve the overall graveyard quality. He said if I can get a rating of 5 or more, he'll promote me to cleric, whatever that means. He did also answer my question about the burial certificate, saying to take it into town and trade it at the tavern. Afterwards, I had a rifle through the tech trees. That's right, Graveyard Keeper has a whole load of different tech trees, and I certainly have my work cut out for me. But with nothing much to do, I decided to make my way to town. I passed by this shady looking dude who was blocking this pathway until the Great Inquisitor comes by. I don't know who that is, but I'm sure he's probably important. Once I made it into town, I popped into the local tavern, the Dead Horse, and had a chat with the tavern owner Heradric. I asked him about the burial certificate. I didn't have the heart to tell him his tavern name sucks, but I was asked to visit the local blacksmith to hand him a letter. And for now, I decided to hold on to my burial certificate. I did have a quick chat with Miss Chain, Heradric's wife, however all she could offer me was a few recipes. So leaving the Dead Horse, I found my way down to Cresvold and handed him the letter. Turns out Heradric wanted some slime slain, and instead of doing it himself, he handed me a broken sword, an energy potion, and a whetstone. You'll see that a lot of villagers love to hand off their responsibilities to me. So I went off slime hunting. It took me a while to figure out how to swing my sword, but when I did, those slimes were as good as slain. I traded the 2 slimes for some simple iron parts with Cresvold, and seeing the dark of night approaching, I walked home. Jerry then jump scared me on the way back, and despite having no brains, he remembered how to cook bread. Up at home, I cleared out some twig bushes as it started to rain, and as I was mining some stone, I saw a love heart on the outhouse. I chopped a tree down and carried a log to my log pile, but it's been a long day, so I thought it'd be best to get some sleep. If you think the weirdness is over, well, think again. It never stops. I awoke to a ghost named Yorick watching over me. Be honest, Yorick, how long have you been floating there for? He complained about the ghost who lives in one of the graves, and he gave me an exhumation permission so I could dig him up and throw him in the river. Sorry, Yorick, you want me to do what now? Well, through the rain, I walked over to the graveyard, dug up the body Yorick was complaining about, and threw it into the river. Seriously, what is this game? Shortly after, Jerry found me and threatened to bite me to death in my sleep. You know, just a casual friendly chat between friends. He did, however, tell me how to burn a body and where to burn it. I think I'm gonna have to sleep with one eye open at night knowing Jerry's around. Up at the graveyard, I cleared out some more twig bushes to help the overall quality. I thought a 5 rating was gonna be easy to get, but you start at -25. So at least I made somewhat of a start. Back home, I adventured down into the cellar where I found some guy yelling at a gate. He's probably the most sane person I've encountered so far. And I cleared some of the broken barrels off the floor. With little energy left, I potted around the cooking area trying to acquaint myself with how some of the menus work, and I accidentally used some sticks for fuel. Trust me when I say I genuinely had no idea what I had done at the time. Outside, I did the same thing, just had a quick look at all the fun things I'd be building soon. I found Yorick floating in my bedroom again as I woke on day 3. Seriously dude, this is getting weird now. Despite being happy his friend had been chucked in the river, he still seemed upset and told me about the red skull, white skull deal with the corpses. I still don't really understand it, but I'm sure in due time I'll get the hang of it. Outside, I spent a bit of time chopping trees and storing the logs over in my log pile before heading to the graveyard and clearing out some bushes, which were giving me a bunch of green tick points. You'll notice you can either get red, green, or blue tick points. Now, red tick points are obtained from handcrafted skills, green tick points are obtained from your knowledge of nature, and blue tick points are obtained from the knowledge of the spiritual world. It sounds a bit cryptic, but you get these points to unlock things from the tick trees. Anyway, up past my house I found a swampy area with some rocks full of iron ore, so I got to mining them. I was about to finish my day until I heard that wonderful bell sound. So I grabbed the corpse and headed into the morgue. With soft spears unlocked, it meant I could work on taking the fat and blood out of a corpse. Horrible, I know, but it took the red skull away, so that's good, right? Maybe because he's got bad blood? Because baby, now we got bad blood. You know he's... Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm still recording. It was still dark when I got up the next day, but I was straight back to the morgue this morning to pick up my dead friend, who I placed in the grave I'd made just for them, which in turn gave me another burial certificate. Back at home, I then used some tick points to unlock primitive foraging, sawing, and simple gravestones. And with these new blueprints, I was able to craft myself a sawhorse, which would let me turn my logs into billets and flitch. Next up, I sawed up some logs into billets so that I could craft a wooden anvil. This is where I can make nails and simple iron parts. I then ventured out collecting stone from the areas around my house, and that was so I could craft my first furnace. And in trying to find fuel for it, my shovel broke, so I had to fix it with my whetstone. As it got dark, I was trying really hard to figure out why I couldn't smelt my iron. Turns out I needed more fuel. However, at the time I wasn't too sure, so I just slunked off to bed. I spent the morning of day 5 chopping down some trees for logs, clearing bushes in the graveyard, and collecting sticks from twig bushes. But after a while, I decided to head to the block path that the shady guy was guarding the other day. Sure enough, when I got there, I met with this famous inquisitor. Before he could have my head chopped, I argued I was the new graveyard keeper, and sure enough, I was let off the hook. As we walked up the hill, he explained that he was the all-beholding inquisitor who has burnt thousands of witches and wizards out of fear of a dark cult rising. And I walked right into the middle of a witch burning. This actually feels like a fever dream. Mainly out of fear of ending up like the poor person burning beside me, I accepted the inquisitor's friendship offer. And then I got the hell out of there. Over at the Dead Horse, Herodric handed me a bear for my work with Cresvold, and I traded my 2 burial certificates for some silver. On the walk back home, I remembered a brainless alcoholic who would love a mug of beer, so at the morgue I handed it over to Jerry, who just complained it wasn't strong enough. Ungrateful bastard. But he did tell me about the portal on Witch Hill, which would be my best bet to get home, and recommended checking out the library in the church basement or finding an astrologer. So I guess it's not all that bad. But it was getting late. I had enough fuel to start smelting some iron ore, and I unlocked the technologies firewood and stoneworking. I fluffed around and made some more billets so I could craft a chopping spot, which I put right beside my wooden anvil. Having a chopping spot means I can make firewood, which is great for fuel. All before finally going to sleep. Through the fog the next day, I spent a bit of time turning billets into firewood and chopping trees for wood, and once my 2 iron had done smelting, I used the firewood for fuel and loaded 11 more ores into the furnace. Over at the graveyard, I added a wooden marker to one grave just for funsies and unlocked the mining technology. And surprisingly, that was about all I did today. On the morning of day 7, I elected to spend some of my hard-earned tech points on the technology's hard spares and important parts, and I mooched my way past the luscious wheat fields into town. Here I did a bit of exploring, passing by new buildings, meeting new people, and finding people to trade goods with, all before backtracking past the wheat fields towards home. I took a detour up to Witch Hill where I found the broken portal hospital Jerry had mentioned, and also a very burnt house where someone used to live. Back at home that night, I chopped some trees and carried logs into the pile, and crafted myself an iron ore stockpile, which turned out to be very useful. I spent a while just fluffing around trying to figure out why I couldn't put my iron on the stockpile. Look, I'm still learning, okay? Give me a break. So on to the next day. Down in the cellar, I found these broken archways, which required a few materials to get past. With a bit of work, I tried to get it moved, but unfortunately, I need wooden planks, which I didn't have the technology for just yet. So I spent a bit of time chopping some trees, hoping to get more red tick points, and by the late afternoon, I was able to get it. I crafted myself a carpenter's workbench. Now I can turn flitch into wooden planks. With all the materials, I headed back down into the cellar and started to clear the collapsed archway. Until I ran out of energy. It's a new day and I'm back full of energy. So back to work I went, and I finally removed the debris in my way. Following the path I had just uncovered, I found my way to a ladder upon which climbing led me into town. I have a feeling this is going to be very handy. I also met another important looking character called the Merchant. Amongst the hiccups, he explained his place was deemed for the town, but he has to earn his keep here in this onion potato hell. His words, not mine. I tried to cure his hiccups by scaring him, but I think I came off just a little bit weird, but it seemed to help. I travelled back through the tunnel, spent a bit of time making some materials, and headed back down into the cellar where I cleared the second collapse. But the guy I had seen yelling at the gate the other day had vanished. And you know what? Maybe that's a good thing. Although knowing he's free to roam around in my cellar is going to make it a little harder to sleep at night. Anyway, I still have some daylight left, so I decided to spend some time at the graveyard using a gifted repair kit to fix a stone fence. And I got halfway through removing and putting back a gravestone when I ran out of energy. Don't ask why I was putting it back, because I don't even know. Quickly moving on to day 10, I used the new tunnel system to make a quick stop into the village, more specifically the Dead Horse. I asked Horadric about the garden beside my house and he gave me permission to use it. All I had to do was double check with the merchant that it's okay. And then I saw he had a teleport stone for sale. And honestly, having the same brain capacity as Jerry does, I bought it because it sounded very exciting. Back home, I did some exploring and found an abandoned apiary looking place and a huge rockfall, although I had access to all the materials needed to break through it. Of course, I stopped back home to craft all the materials needed, and I headed back to the rockfall. I smashed my way through it and continued my exploring. I made my way through a forest and across a river, but I heard that damn bell go off again. But that'll have to wait for now because I had made it to the quarry. It was a sad looking place, but here I found a place for marble, stone, and iron to be mined. So that's cool. And with my handy dandy teleport stone, I teleported right back home. You know, I think I made a good choice with this teleport stone. I made my way down to a corpse laying on the ground, all thanks to our communist donkey friend. I shoved it on the autopsy table and decided to deal with that tomorrow. For now, it's bedtime. It's tomorrow, so it's time to deal with that pesky corpse. I extracted the blood which took away the red skull and experimented by taking out the heart, but I lost a white skull, which is bad news. I furthered my experimenting by taking out the intestines, which not only took away another white skull, but I made a surgeon's mistake. So I dealt with the body in a very professional manner. Like I said, very professional. Since I was close to the graveyard, I used some more repair kits to repair some of the broken fences and gravestones, which brought my overall quality up to -11. Afterwards, I made my way up to Witch Hill where I found the Inquisitor once again. In order to make sure the next witch burning went swimmingly, he tasked me to bring firewood and flyers to the next burning. You know, so we can make a real shindig out of this thing. Returning home, I passed by everyone's favorite donkey, meaning one thing and one thing only. We had another corpse on our hands. With this morning's failed surgery still fresh in my mind, I extracted both the blood and fat without removing the important parts, which meant his body had 4 white skulls. So I hauled it over to the graveyard, chucked it into Yorick's favorite grave, and headed home. Before bed, I took some time to sort my inventory into a chest so I could go back and get the burial certificate, and then I got some much needed rest. If I'm being honest, I spent a lot of day 12 just pottering around home, crafting materials, making firewood, and smelting more iron in the furnace. But I did take an afternoon stroll through the woods over to the quarry where I repaired the crafting station, and decided to craft a quarry for the marble. Now that I had a quarry, I was able to mine some, which gave me 2 big slabs of it. A normal person would have left it there, but what did I do? I ran both slabs all the way back home. I'm not even kidding, look at me go! Closer to home, I got swarmed by bats and I had to cut my losses and leave one slab behind. I then took my goofy ass to bed. But not to worry, the next morning I went back for the second slab and stored it on the stone pile. Totally worth it, right? Afterwards, I used some tech points to get the tools, glass, improvement, transplanting, and beekeeping technologies, since they honestly didn't require a lot of points to unlock. Then, using the letter Heradric gave me the other day, I unlocked the garden crafting station where I decided to make a garden bed with sticks. Did I have anything to plant? No, I did not. My tools were looking a bit worse for wear, so I used the whetstone to fix them all back up to working standard, and as I worked away I heard the donkey's bell go off again. I repeated the same process as the day before yesterday, removing both the blood and fat in order for the body to have 4 skulls before shoving the body into a grave and obtaining another burial certificate. Which leads us on to day 14. This morning I took the tunnels into the village and popped into the dead horse where I found another important looking character who went by the name of Miss Charm. Unfortunately, she wouldn't answer my questions and told me to come back when I've got more faith in myself. Something I tell myself every single day. However, I did get into a conversation with Wagner, a poet who yearns to read a poem to Miss Charm. He told me that he's out of ink and paper though, so I'll add that to my ever-growing list of things to do. Just south of the dead horse, I found a path blocked off to town, before teleporting all the way back to the quarry. Here I fluffed around mining some stone and iron and seeing what I needed to craft. I was a bit lacking on the materials, so I teleported home where I spent a while collecting more logs to turn into flitch. I teleported back to the quarry where I made an iron stockpile and a stone cutter, and spent some time figuring out how task queues work, and cutting slabs of iron into iron ores. I even found an abandoned mine shaft, which sadly is too deadly for me to go down. But it was getting late, so it's on to day 15. This morning I figured out that you can lift up buckets of water from the well outside, and I used the water and flour I had to make dough at the cooking table, which I shoved into the oven. All I have to do now is wait for it to cook into bread. Look at us go. To pass the time, I made my way back to the quarry to build myself a stone stockpile, and I was mining some iron when I heard that damn bell go off again. I swear, that donkey waits until I'm far away as possible before dropping off a corpse. I popped the iron I had mined into the stockpile and teleported home where I dealt with that corpse well and good. After plopping it into a freshly dug grave, I received another burial certificate and headed home. The next day started down in the cellar where I met the crazy gate hater, whose name I found out with Snake. I had the option to threaten him, but I thought I'd better not, and I ran away instead. Over in town, I decided to do some more exploring, so I headed east. I introduced myself to a man named Dig, who spoke in coherent sentences as well as I could find the lucky ring in Stardew Valley, so not very well. He did ask for honey in return for a cake recipe though. Continuing on, I found my way to the lighthouse. I met the lighthouse keeper who, in return for moths, would give me a rod to fish with, which I totally don't forget about. Back home, I unlocked the advanced forging tech and made a better anvil than my wooden one. The difference is with this anvil, I can make complex iron parts. I also made myself a better axe and used it to chop trees for logs for the rest of the day. Day 17, I honestly spent working on the graveyard. I used materials to make wooden markers and fences which I decorated the bare graves with. I did this for a while until the donkey came by that evening with a fresh delivery. So I worked on the corpse and buried it in the graveyard, fixed up some broken markers, and after a day full of hard work, I had improved the graveyard quality rating to exactly 5. I guess you could say I headed to bed that night and dreamed about how awesome I am. The following day started with baking some fresh bread. I must say it's been super useful when I run low on energy. With a house full of the smell of fresh bread, I teleported my way back to the lighthouse where I found the astrologer Jerry was talking about all that time ago. Knowledge only seems to bring the astrologer sadness, so instead he asked for a skull. Sounds about right. I also ran this log home for some reason. I will admit, it was way less stressful than the marble incident though, that's for sure. With the log safely home, I unlocked the weapons technology and teleported myself to the quarry. I was halfway through stone cutting when that damn donkey dropped off another corpse. I swear to God, man, pick a better time. So, back home, I chucked it onto the table and told myself I'll deal with it tomorrow. And just before bed, I put some iron ore into the furnace for smelting. It's day 19, and like I told myself yesterday, I dealt with the corpse. The bishop was back at the church today and I was excited to show him the new and improved graveyard. For my efforts, I was pronounced keeper and prior of the church. Inside, the bishop explained I can arrange church services which will give me faith, so I attempted my first service. I was also told that I needed to provide a service every Sunday. You may notice there's only 6 days, and that's because there's no Saturday. It's weird, but you just have to roll with it. Anyway, outside the Royal Services box had opened up, which gave me access to a bunch of cool things at prices way beyond what I could make right now. However, I'm sure in due time I'll be able to afford them. For now, I paid Heradric a visit at the Dead Horse to trade him 5 burial certificates, and back at the church, I popped in to see the basement. I knocked down a few broken shelves and had to quickly return home to sort my very full inventory, and continued clearing out the basement. I stumbled upon the study table, which is how one gets a lot of tech points from studying different items and objects. Without even realizing it, I accidentally made 4 science with a note and was able to study a piece of flitch. And I'll be completely honest with you right now, I had no idea what I had done in the moment. Trust me, I was so lost, but it's pretty funny watching it back. Upon waking up the next day, I found someone in my house. He quickly explained to me that he wasn't a thief, but a marquis. A bunch of them escaped prison who were sentenced to burn by the Inquisition, and they had come to set up camp nearby. He took me to the camp and ran over some details, saying they'd need food and water and that I had to keep the camp top secret. I was also introduced to Master Alaric, who was almost deaf. He asked me a few confusing questions before telling me to leave. Back at the morgue, I fixed the crafting station in hopes of crafting a trunk, but I couldn't even build one. My storage is full, man. Where am I supposed to put all of these body parts? So I put my thinking cap on and finally removed the iron ore stockpile and built a second trunk. I then tried to study a few more things down at the study table, but I quickly ran out of faith, so I headed home, unlocked the decay technology, and hit the hay. In the early hours of day 21, I started my day by making a compost heap in my garden area. Afterwards, I kinda just stared out over my workyard for a while. But once I regained myself, I paid a visit to the quarry to mine for big slabs of iron ore. Then, using the stone cutter, turned those big slabs of iron into iron ore I could smelt back home. Speaking of back home, I loved the stone cutter so much I decided to craft one to have in my workyard. And that was so I could make gravestones. Sure, wooden markers are fine, but these give you a 2 rating, whereas the wooden ones only give 1. So I took off to the graveyard where I replaced all the wooden markers with gravestones, bumping my overall rating to 11. As the night drew to a close, I fought off a few bats on the way to the apiary, thinking I'd be able to build something. I could not. So I headed back home. I found Cresvold lurking around my house this morning. I thought he was here to make fun of my living conditions, but he wasn't. He explained to me that there were rumors of a vampire in the village and we had to meet with everyone at the tavern. Once we arrived, Heradric was telling everyone of the vicious vampire attacks. When asking the villagers for help, we got a 15% off sales pitch from Corey, a suggestion from Adam to have 2 bodyguards to a person so they wouldn't write slander on his walls, a pitch from the woodcutter to go vegan, and if that wasn't enough, the beekeeper pipes up and blames it on his sworn rival, Hornet Man. Heradric then took me aside and asked me to look into all of this vampire stuff, which makes sense since all the village people seem to all share a single brain cell. With the village meeting still ringing in my ears, I headed home to clean up the apiary area and figured out I can forage for honey from beehives and trees, so that's cool. With the honey, I headed back to Crazy Bilbo Baggins here, but I didn't realize I needed 5 of it, so instead I just took off to explore. Just north of the village, I found the outskirts of what looks like a castle, and with further adventuring, I found a blocked off road to the mountain fort. Just beside that, I stumbled across a gypsy baron who seemed to be cooking something very delicious. However, being a cheeky lad, he tasked me to bring him 4 silver star fish fillets before he'd teach me how to cook the kebabs. I started my day in the early hours of the morning making firewood and using it to smelt into iron in the furnace. As I was heading down the path, I was ambushed by the shepherd, who made the bold assumption that I was the vampire. To prove my innocence, I told him I work in the sun all the time. Didn't work, so the next best thing was to eat a bunch of garlic. And then he made me do it again. The lunatic still wasn't convinced and offered to prove myself innocent by plunging a wooden stake through my heart. So I quickly told him I'll find the real vampire, and if not, then he can do whatever he wants. After that debacle, I had a chat with Jerry in the morgue, who told me the old keeper used to have a lot of helpers. He said one of them was still chained up in the northern part of the church cellar, but to never unchain him. So I added that to my ever-growing list of things to watch out for. Afterwards, I found myself in the Dead Horse trying to question Miss Chain about the vampire attacks, but ended up playing devil's advocate for her and Heradric, who were quite frankly having issues. But I was finally told to seek out the astrologer and ask him. Next on my list of people to question was Rosa, who told me the vampire lured her into a barn, drank her blood, and then ran away yelling, "Group B, it's like you're all mocking me." You know, if I saw the vampire, I'd tell him beggars can't be choosers. Anyway, while in town, I bought 4 more honey from the beekeeper and headed back to the crazy old Bilbo Baggins. Yet stupidly, I left the 5th one at home. Back at home, I found the donkey waiting to congratulate me on being the new church prior. How'd he do that, you may ask? With a big old turd, of course. And I dealt with the body accordingly, even adding a lovely wooden fence and gravestone for decoration. The next day, I started off back in the village handing over the honey Dig had asked for, and I received the cake recipe in return. Over at the lighthouse, I handed the astrologer the skull he had asked for, and then bombarded him with a bunch of questions, one of which gave me access to a key that might help me open the gate Snake had been yelling at. I'd just have to study it in the church basement for it to work. I wanted to ask about vampires, however, unfortunately, I think I needed more friendship points with him. So I said peace out Girl Scout and teleported home. Soon after, I found the donkey back beside the morgue, this time with bad news. He was going on strike. He demanded oil for his cartwheels, no more body deliveries on Sundays, and carrots in advance as payment for corpses. So with the carrot seeds I got yesterday from cleaning up his dump, I planted down 3 small fields worth of carrots. I finished the day building a trunk in my garden to store my natural resources before turning in for the night. It was day 25 and I was very excited for my first sermon. I had a quick chat to the bishop outside who told me he was going to open a soup kitchen. To help with his image, of course. Why else would you open a soup kitchen for the poor? He was after some cheap bowls and asked me to make some with the clay deposits I have in front of the church. And then it was time to preach the word of the church. 5 people came, and it was a bit of a bust. I got 1 single faith and 42 copper coins. But hey, I could have gone worse. After the sermon, just below the church, I got to dig in clay from the deposits, unlocking the clay technology in order to craft a potter's wheel, which I used to make all of the bowls the bishop was after. And after a hard day's work, I handed the bishop all of the clay bowls he asked for. Impressed with my work, he offered to make the church bigger, only if I improved the graveyard and the inside of the church first. But that's a lot of work for another day, so I headed home. The following day began with upgrading my tools. Now that I had the means to do so, I thought, why not? I had also crafted an extra axe to hand off to the woodcutter, and in return he gave me a recipe to make lasagna and pasta. In all honesty, I didn't achieve much today. I think I was wandering around trying to find the farmer's son to ask him about the vampire attacks, but I honestly couldn't find him. I did stop past the rundown mill and I met the miller, who I traded some flour with to make some more bread. However, I ran out of energy, so the next morning I finished up making the dough and shoving it into the oven. Out in the foggy morning, I passed by the garden to manifest my carrots to grow faster and remove the garden patch with sticks, since I didn't have anything to grow. Soon after, I bought the tech to make flyers, thinking I'd be able to make them straight away. Silly me was very wrong. In better news, my carrots were all done growing, so I shoved a bunch of carrots in the box for Donkey. If I'm being honest, the rest of the day I spent mooching around home and the church, realizing my mistake of using my precious tech points on something I couldn't make yet. I did unlock papercrafting and I studied a couple more items later on though. So quickly moving on to day 28, my morning was spent crafting materials in the workyard so that down in the church basement I could make myself a church workbench. Here is where I can make paper amongst other things later on, and paper, as I'll soon learn, can be decomposed at the study table, which turns into science, something you need in order to study things. For now though, I needed the donkey to deliver some corpses, and for that to happen I needed to oil up his wheels. I vaguely remembered that old mate Crazy Bilbo Baggins sold some, so I paid him a visit. And would you look at that, he had some, so I bought some seed oil. And what did I do with it? I stupidly took the oil out of the glass. When I got back to Donkey, I realized my mistake, so I quickly teleported back to the dead horse and ran over to Dig, who wasn't there anymore. Guys, like I do one thing and then I just forget about it and then I teleport back and he's not even there, so why am I even doing this? This is stupid. If it wasn't obvious, the next day began with a shameful walk back to Dig where I purchased the second vial of oil. No, I didn't remove the oil like last time. I traded a burial certificate with Heradric at the dead horse and found out everyone's a flat earther.
You need to leave!
all before returning back to the donkey and handing over the oil for his wheels. The corpse he dropped had more red skulls than I'm used to, and after trying to remove the fat, I saw I had made a surgeon's mistake, so I dispersed with the body in a professional manner yet again. On the walk back home, Donkey informed me that I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. The executive committee of the Party of the Donkey's Proletariat had decided to prepare for a revolution. My first task was to send them a cookbook and 5 red apples inside a special contraband box. And if I refuse, they'll burn down my home, graveyard, church, and put me on a blacklist. Now don't get me wrong, revolutions are fun and all, but a working man needs his sleep, so that's exactly where I headed. Day 30 started in the garden, collecting some peat and maggots from the compost heap and harvesting my own grown carrots. Down past the wheat fields, I finally found the farmer's son. I have no idea why I didn't check here before. So I asked him about the vampire. He made it very clear to me that he had just hid from the vampire when he thought it may have been his father on the booze. Although I tried to make him feel better by saying I do the same thing at 15 and ooh, yeah, okay. Anyway, I said hello to the farmer and I saw he was able to trade a whole range of seeds, which I'm sure will come in handy later. But I heard the sweet ding of the body bell, so I teleported home. Unfortunately, a few things went wrong on the operating table, so it was off to the river once again. Walking home, I built up Donkey's top secret, very out in the open, definitely not top secret, contraband box, and practiced my sword fighting skills on the air to tire me out for a good night's rest. My log pile was looking a bit empty this morning, so I started my day by chopping trees and restocking it with more logs. Today was another Sunday, so I performed my second sermon, which went about as well as the first one. Not very well, but that's okay. I had a feeling in order to deliver more successful sermons, I'd have to improve the church quality. That evening, I found myself at the quarry mining away at some iron, which I then turned into iron ore. As for the rest of the night, it wasn't very eventful. So we're on to day 32. Now, if I'm being honest, I spent the whole day trying to get some blue tick points, which I found out I could get from studying body parts in the church basement. However, to get said points, I needed science, and as stated previously, you get science from decomposing paper, and to get paper, I needed to craft it out of pigskin paper, which you can craft from bat wings or skin from an autopsy. But as night drew near, Donkey felt it was the perfect time to drop off a body, so I removed a few important parts just in case I'd need them later on, and threw the corpse down the river. Then up in the forest, I waited for bats to spawn, but they never did. The one time I actually wanted to be swarmed by bats. Sleep is for the weak, I say, and rolling into day 33, I said no to sleeping and wandered my way into the village. I found the merchant and told him I'd been given permission to use the garden near the church. He said that's fine, but only if I grew some carrots, cabbages, and beets for him. Then he'd consider being business partners, so we reached a deal. He also asked me to help him with his hiccups by finding some hiccup grass, which I definitely don't forget about. As the early morning sun rose, I stood waiting for the farmer to appear so I could buy those seeds, and I had a strange sense of deja vu. I started to get a little impatient and I ended up teleporting home since I thought he wouldn't come outside. Over at the church basement, I used the skin I had got yesterday to make some pigskin paper, which I turned into normal paper, decomposed for science, and then used that to study blood, which gave me a whole 20 blue tick points. Woohoo, look at us go. I used it to unlock the writing, comfort of faith, light of faith, and cremation technologies. Trust me, I did want to study more things, but my issue now is faith, of which I had none. Instead, I crafted some materials, threw a corpse on the autopsy table to deal with later, and built a desk in the church basement. This is where I'll be able to write notes, flyers, chapters, and books. Not only that, but more prayers to use in my sermons. But not having slept in 2 days, I ran through the rain all the way back home for a much needed sleep. The next day, on day 34, I quite honestly spent the whole day working on the church. I did that by adding some more church pews and candelabras. And by the end of the day, the church was looking great and had a quality rating of 11. The morning of day 35, I was on the hunt for river sand, which I ended up just finding north of the church along the riverbank. Why did I need some, you may ask? Well, using the sand with some old books I had found breaking down those old shelves ages ago, I was able to make some clean paper, which will go a long way to help us as we study more items. I then made myself a chest upstairs in the church, which is where I'll keep my prayers. Later on in the day, I passed by the wheat fields and paid a visit to the farmer so I could buy those seeds. And back at the garden, I planted down some beet, cabbage, and carrot seeds for the merchant. And just before bed, I spent a bit of time restocking the log pile. The following day, my task was to make some flyers for that weird witch-burning Inquisitor guy. I popped over to the lighthouse and spoke to the astrologer, where I bought a bottle of ink and a pen and ink. Passing by the dead horse, I dropped off the ink and some paper to Wagner. Despite having all the things to write his poem, he seemed to be lacking inspiration, and asked me to bring him wine in exchange for a story. At the church, using some pen and ink and some paper, I made the 10 flyers I needed for the Inquisitor's task, and back home I chopped up some firewood, which meant I had everything to give him. All I had to do was wait for the next Tuesday to roll around. As for the rest of the day, as you can see, I didn't get up to too much more. I was so excited for my sermon today since upgrading the church recently that I got there early and waited very patiently, and I'm not a very patient man. Today's sermon, I'm happy to say, was a swimming success. Look at all my subjects agreeing with what I'm saying. After the sermon, I received 4 faith and 51 copper coins worth of donations, so not too shabby. Down in the basement, I used that faith to study some more body parts, which gave me a buttload of blue tick points. I then used those tick points to unlock the Gentle Butcher, stone gravestones, price of faith, writing supplies, farmer, master gatherer, and insect technologies. That night I worked for a bit in the morgue on the body I had kind of forgotten about, and after a bit of surgery, I buried it in the graveyard. Day 38, I spent mining out big slabs of stone from the quarry, using the stone cutter to turn them into normal stone, and back home using it to make stone grave fences. And as an added bonus, they give blue tick points. I was trying to make lots to switch out the wooden ones since the stone fences give a higher quality rating. However, I quickly ran out of bread and eventually energy. So after a big night's sleep the next day, I continued to craft some stone grave fences, which I chucked in the graveyard chest since it took most of my energy to make them. I did have enough energy left to harvest my crops I'd been growing for the merchant, however I didn't get quite as many as I'd hoped, since I needed 12 of each. So off I ran through the rain all the way to the farmer where I purchased a few more seeds, and back at the garden I planted down a few more beets, cabbage and carrot seeds. On my way back to the farmer I took a moment to pay my respects to the poor fella who, it seems, didn't quite stick the landing. Rest in peace, my friend. Rest in peace. Anyway, I was back again because I wanted flour, which I used to make dough and cook into more bread, since I had run out yesterday. Ironically, I ran out of energy halfway through making the dough. So I woke up the next day to finish off the job and shoved it all into the oven to be made into delicious bread. Most of my time today was taken up in the graveyard, removing old wooden grave fences in favour of the nicer and not to mention classier stone grave fences. And by the time I'd finished, the graveyard quality had jumped up to a rating of 26. To finish the day, I refilled Donkey's crate with carrots, unlocked the bee domestication and inventing stories technologies, performed a sacred crop dance, and finally headed to bed for some sleepy times. Day 41 started with a morning stroll to Witch Hill, where I found the Inquisitor and handed over both the firewood and flyers. He proceeded with the witch burning, but the townsfolk seemed to be pretty bored and they kinda just left. Annoyed, the Inquisitor gave me permission to use his land to grow grapes in order to make wine, which he was hoping would increase the guard motivation to find more witches, saying they find a witch every day when they're drunk. I was gonna say something, but I don't think it's my place to be a crazy man's moral compass. Instead, I unlocked the western half of the graveyard thanks to the Inquisitor, and fixed up some graves, bringing the quality rating up to 30. Heading to the morgue with another body, Jerry had a go at me for being friends with the Inquisition, to which I replied that I just honestly wanted to get home. I fought off some bats on the way to the apiary crafting station, which I repaired before calling it in for the night. My beets, cabbage and carrots were looking pretty ripe for picking the next morning, which meant I now had enough of each for the merchant. And down in the church basement, I was honestly scratching my head trying to figure out how to make more prayers. I paid a visit to the astrologer to buy another pen and ink, but I seemed to be significantly poorer than I was before, so I couldn't afford it. I then fluffed around town for a while, not really doing much. But later that night I worked on another corpse, which I buried in the graveyard. It's day 43 and I began my day with a stroll through the tunnels into the village where I sold my burial certificates off to Heredric. Then back at the church, I told the bishop I'd improved the graveyard, to which he said he's no longer disgusted to be here. Better watch it, man, or I might have a few choice words to say about you in my next sermon if you're not careful. Speaking of sermons, I did one. And thank goodness it just went as well as last week's one. I then spent the rest of the day making simple iron parts, smelting a bunch of iron in the furnace, and adding some extra candelabras to the church. I spent the morning of day 44 grinding away in the workyard, making wooden planks and simple iron parts, in hopes I could make a few more pews for the church. My only problem, there's no space for them. Yeah. I did get to place some more candelabras though, so I guess it wasn't all that bad. Afterwards, I ended up unlocking the grape farming technology, which puts me one step closer to winemaking. That didn't stop me from checking the vineyard area just in case I had magically summoned grape seeds into my inventory. On the walk home, I came across everyone's favourite donkey hauling another body to the morgue just for me. Before dealing with the corpse, I stood in the rain and fixed the corpse hatch. I performed a quick bit of surgery, but I got bored, so I headed home. Which leads us on to day 45. My day began putting my latest corpse to rest and decorating the grave accordingly, before gathering up my crops and paying the merchant a visit. I handed them all over and quite frankly wanted to smack him around his hiccuping mouth with that response. Instead, I agreed to help him become the keeper of the king's kitchen. All I needed was a trade license so we could begin our partnership. Afterwards, I saw he was selling some grape seeds, so I bought a few, which I planted over at the vineyard. As night came, I just fluffed around for a while, not doing much. The next morning started with a trip to the Dead Horse, where I handed Heradric another burial certificate for a bit of cash money. On the way back home, I ran into Snake, and being the nosy graveyard keeper that I am, I decided to follow him. But he honestly just disappeared. That man really holds up to his name. Back at home that evening, I constructed a couple more stone fences, which I used to replace some wooden ones over in the graveyard. And as night fell, I went around picking flowers in hopes of finding moths. Yes, that's right, I finally remembered about the lighthouse keeper's quest. After collecting more than enough, I headed back home. So the following day, day 47, I met with the lighthouse keeper and traded 6 of my moths for the simple fishing rod. Teleporting to the quarry, I sought out a good fishing spot, which I ended up finding by the river. So for a while I stood there casting my line into the river where I caught a bunch of bream. Although I got a bit bored after a while, so I teleported home and shoved the fish into my cooking trunk. As the days rolled over one onto the next, I found myself fishing once again. This time in the dead of night in the lake just north of the village, where I caught a whole lot of gudgeon. I then spent a while running around the lighthouse wondering if there were any spots to fish into the ocean. Maybe it was the Stardew Valley brain within me, but I found no such spot. It seemed I wasn't finished fishing though. Back at the river, I fished for a bit longer before returning home. While home, I carved up some quality fish fillets, and with some of them at the bream I caught While home, I carved up some of the quality fish fillets with some of the bream I had caught and performed yet another sacred crop dance for my grapes. All before paying the quarry a visit to mine some big slabs of stone. And using the stone cutter, I turned them into regular stone since I was running a bit low, which ended up taking me to the end of the day. Excitement was in the air again on day 49 because it's a Sunday, and Sunday is for our favourite man in the whole entire world. Me! Before today's sermon, I went to hand the bishop the fillets I'd prepared, but was completely bamboozled to see he wanted lower quality fillets. So I quickly went back to the cooking table where I carved up some lower quality fillets. Returning to the bishop, I handed over the fillets and headed into the church. Today's sermon provided me with 5 faith and a lot of donations, which you'll love to see. Down in the basement, I used some faith to study more body parts, which in turn gave me loads of blue tech points. I used them to unlock the woodcutter, power of faith, anatomy 2, and inborn blacksmith technologies. I then put the woodcutter technology to the test and chopped down a couple of big trees, which gave me 4 logs a pop. After restocking my log pile, I decided to use the time left in the day to build a confessional booth in the church. I did have to remove a couple of candelabras, but the booth gave me an extra 5 quality, so I didn't mind. It's day 50 and there's a certain crisp burnt corpse smell in the air. Well, okay, maybe not. But I did make a place to burn bodies down by the crematorium area. And a trunk, of course. However, if I'm being honest, today was a bit of a nothing day. So the following day, I rolled up my sleeves and I got to work. Out in the workyard, I put some iron ore in the furnace to smelt, paid the farmer a visit to purchase some flour and carrot seeds, planted down those carrot seeds in the garden, and chucked some dough in the oven to cook into bread. Up past my house in the swampy area, I found a massive rock fall, however I said it couldn't be moved, so I decided to trust myself and leave it for now. Down in the church basement, I used the remaining faith I had to study the intestines, which in return gave me some more blue tick points, which I used to unlock the the advanced smelting, glassblower, and winemaking technologies. Before bed, I also decided to remove the stone stockpile since I really didn't need it, and I hid my 2 famous slabs of marble right behind my house. Day 52, I was back up and at 'em. I refilled Donkey's crate with the payment of carrots, built a double pallet in the morgue for no real particular reason, and found all the winemaking things in the basement that I have to craft to meet this overwhelming demand for wine. Safe to say everyone here is an alcoholic. I then finished the day out slaying some bats for bat wings. Day 53 began back in the church basement, turning bat wings into pigskin paper. Why, you may ask? Well, it's all for a better furnace. Although I kinda had no space in my work yard, and yeah, I totally could have added more space, but come on, that's too easy. So I moved my carpenter's workbench to where the stone stockpile was, removed the other workbench, had to move all the body parts from my trunk to the chest at the foot of my bed, removed that trunk, removed the anvil, and finally I had the space to build up my new furnace. Good God, that took way too long. Donkey, for once, dropped off another body at the perfect time, so I performed a thorough autopsy and slapped the body on my double pallet. See, I knew I made it for a reason. And as the sun was setting, I recrafted another anvil, which I placed in a better spot, and I buried the body in the graveyard with some additional decorations, of course. I went to bed that night with the odd smell of older body parts wafting through the air. The next day I got to work down in the cellar setting up a winemaking area. I hammered away in the workyard until I had enough materials to build a winemaking barrel. I did the same again, making a quick stop to the quarry to cut some stone, and returned home where I built up a vine press next to my massive barrel. I then found Donkey making his way down the old cobblestone road and gave him a bit of encouragement. I did a bit of surgical work before placing the body on my double pallet. I think I was forcing myself to use the double pallet to make up for the fact that I really didn't need it. Over at the vineyard, I harvested my grapes, but unfortunately only received 5, which is a shame because to make wine you need 15 grapes to press into a barrel of grape juice. Disappointed, I went to sleep. I began day 55 with a quick trip into the village, where I traded my most recent burial certificate with Heredric. And back at the church, I told the bishop about our beautiful looking church. The next step to a bigger church was a building permit, which from the Royal Services box was 20 silver.
Oh my god.
I don't have that kind of money. Anyway, I performed another sermon giving the same spiel as I always have, but it seems to work and I was given more faith and lots of wonderful donations. After this sermon, I spent a while down in the basement trying to work out how to obtain the combo prayer, which as you'll see is the start of an unhealthy obsession. It requires a book to craft rather than chapters like the other prayers, which must mean it's good, right? I was hooked on crafting it. I also unlocked the book's technology to help me get started. Now, I'm going to explain this now so I don't have to later. To get the combo prayer, you need a book and 7 faith. To get a book, you need a cover and a chapter. To get a chapter, you need 3 notes. To get notes, you need a story, a pen and ink, and clean paper. To get a pen and ink, you need feathers and ink. To get ink, you need black paint, conical flasks, and water. Black paint can only be made at an alchemy table with graphite powder and water, and graphite powder can only be grinded down at an alchemy mill from graphite, only if you've studied it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, is how you make a combo prayer. This will be the first time I admit to using the Graveyard Keeper wiki to help me figure this out, because there is no way in hell that I could have done that on my own. That night, as the days changed over, I decided to fix the bridge beside the church and go exploring. What I came across was a massive looking swamp area, and you may want to avert your eyes as you watch me figure this out. I mean, just look at me fumble my way looking around for a way in. But eventually I did find a way in, and after a bit of maze exploration and figuring out where the hell I was going, I made it all the way to the center. I came across an interesting looking character who seemed to have forgotten who they were. Good news for me, thanks to the game HUD, I found out her name was Clotho. Clotho? I'm gonna go with Clotho. Anyway, she told me to make her a health potion or bring her the cauldron with all the ingredients to make one. And afterwards, I unlocked the beginning of Alchemy technologies, which is a good start to making that combo prayer. Heading out, I found a place to build a bridge to shortcut through the swamp. Unfortunately for me, I didn't bring anything with me, so I was back out the long way. So back home, I worked away making all the materials I needed, trekked all the way back around the long way into the center of the swamp, and built the bridge, which as you can see, I was quite clearly very happy about. The next morning, I popped into the morgue to see I'd forgotten about a certain corpse, so I quickly took care of that. I then picked some carrots and replanted some seeds, and to be quite honest, that's about all I achieved today. I started day 58 down in the cellar, convincing Snake to help him open the gate with a little bit of faith. He agreed that I seemed harmless, and in return he gave me instructions for the key, which is exactly what I was after. I paid a quick visit to Heradric to hand over a burial certificate before returning to the church basement. Ironically, I didn't have enough faith to study the key, so I guess I'll have to wait another week before I can open the gate Snake has marked as his mortal enemy. Instead, I spent a while chopping trees and refilling my log pile. Later that evening, Donkey dropped off another body, so I took it inside the morgue and took the skin, which I then studied for a few more blue tick points. Being the professional surgeon that I am, I inserted the skin back, took out the blood and fat all without a slip up, and buried the corpse in the graveyard. And with a pat on the back and a job well done, I went to bed. Continuing on to day 59, my day was spent mostly waiting for glass to smelt in my furnace. Oh, I also traded another burial certificate for money and performed surgery on another corpse. But yeah, as you can see, just waiting for glass to smelt. And rolling into day 60 when the glass had done smelting, I put it back for round 2 so I could make some conical flasks, and I stared into the ever-glowing embers of the furnace. But I thought I'd make use of my time by replenishing my lack of stone up at the quarry. To pass more time, I decided to bury the body I'd left from yesterday, and then it was back to staring at the furnace. If you thought that wasn't enough, I then went for round 3 to make advanced conical flasks. You'll see what I need these for soon, I promise. Then to finish the day off, I refilled Donkey's carrot crate. The next morning I headed into the workyard to pick up my finished advanced conical flasks, and as the sun rose on yet another beautiful Sunday morning, I presented another dazzling sermon to the weird hooded people, and I watched as all the donations rolled in. Down in the church basement, I used those advanced conical flasks to build an alchemy workbench. Afterwards, I kinda just stood there for a while. I wouldn't ask. But as night rolled around, I regained control and headed to the quarry where, embarrassingly, I found a whole coal deposit there on the other side of the mine. To think I was making firewood like a chump. I had a whole lot of coal right there. I worked through the rain into day 62, but as the rain eased, I returned home where I paid the study table a visit. I thought studying coal was the same as studying granite, and the smarter of you will say, no, it's not. To which I'd say, yes, you're right. Rightly confused, I put it on home where I spent a while faffing around. I think I needed more blue tick points to unlock a technology so I could make an alchemy mill, but I couldn't find anything to study. So instead, I finally studied the Keeper's Key, which gave me an active key. Now I just have to wait until Snake arrives in a couple of days. Turns out I did find something worthwhile to study, a wooden grave fence, which gave me a few more blue tick points. Donkey delivered another body that evening, but upon looking at how many red skulls it had, I decided to remove a few important parts for funsies and laid the corpse to rest, floating down the river. I began day 63 making stone fences for blue tick points, crafting some clean paper in the church basement, and trading another burial certificate to Heradric. Afterwards, I had to deal with another body. I tried really hard to put it into the corpse holder, but it didn't turn out successful. This one again had a few more red skulls than usual, but instead of the usual river toss event, I decided to make use of my crematorium area, and I think I got a little carried away burning the body. Burning the bodies does give me burial certificates, so that is very handy to know. The slippery snake man was back dwelling in my cellar on day 64, and I finally let him conquer his gate problems. As we walked in, Snake confided in me. He seems to believe everyone in the village thinks he's worthless, so he's gonna show them who's boss. Also, I think it's quite funny that Snake takes long meaningful strides while I walk like Mr. Krabs. Anyway, I found the room with the diary I was hoping to get for the astrologer, but upon stepping on the ominous glowing plate, I got booby-trapped Goonies style and I died. If you're old enough to get that Goonies reference, then shout out to you. But yeah, I was dead. Lucky for me, I just woke up back at home, so I wandered back on over to Snake. He said it was unfair that an idiot like me was immortal, and then he said he hated me. But Snake changed his tune quite quickly, realizing that I could be useful, and tasked me to get him a bucket of blood and some bloody nails from the dungeon. However, before I could explore that fun-sounding ride, my attention turned to a strange noise. A noise coming from Gunter. I hid it inside the cell, and Gunter really wanted me to hit him with my sword. This feels a little wrong, but I obliged anyway. After feeling something for the first time in years, Gunter explained to me that he was a zombie. He was a little special, hence why he's chained up. However, his brothers, he said, could be a big help, and he told me to dig one up along the path to the forest. And after that wonderful chat with Gunter, I carefully sneaked past the flame grate and picked up the old keeper's diary before deciding to explore the dungeon. I cleared out some bats and slimes and also figured out I could smash these big pots which had cool loot in them. But I did feel a little underprepared, so I left the dungeon and vowed to come back soon. Day 65, I'll admit, was a little less exciting than yesterday. I planted some more carrots, bought some more flour from the farmer, which I then turned into dough to cook more bread, and chopped down some more trees to fill my log pile. That afternoon, I found myself back up at the quarry, cutting slabs of iron into iron ore so that back at home I could shove it all into the furnace to smelt into iron bars. And after sharpening up my tools on the grindstone that night, I headed to bed. I woke up the next day and immediately teleported myself to the lighthouse, where I handed off the keeper's diary to the astrologer. In exchange for the diary, he offered me some information about how to open the portal at Witch Hill, saying I needed to craft a spirit laser. Sounds a little dangerous, but to get us started I needed some acid and restoration tools to help him read some more of the diary. In all honesty, I spent most of the day mooching around the church basement, working out how I could make my combo prayer. But that evening I did make a resurrection table thanks to a blueprint Gunter gave me, and I also restocked a donkey's crate full of carrots. Speaking of Gunter, I went in search of that zombie he mentioned buried in the path just before the forest. It wasn't too hard to miss, and once I had recovered the zombie, I carried him all the way to the morgue and plopped him onto the double pallet. Looking through the technologies, I saw a few new ones all related to zombie workers, and the prospect of automating menial tasks with zombies made me feel very happy. I even unlocked a couple of them to get me started. Day 67 was another Sunday, so it was time to inspire the masses with some wise words. And once again, I got to watch all the donations fill up my box with those sweet, sweet coins. Afterwards, I decided to carry Ferdinand the zombie, yes, that's his name now, all the way up to the quarry. So back home in the workyard, I got to gathering all the materials I would need before teleporting all the way back to the quarry. I built the left mine for our friend to work in and set Ferdinand to work. I have no idea how this works, by the way, so let's just cross our fingers and hope it does. Later on that night, I returned to the quarry and built a porter station. Again, no idea what it is, but I built it anyway. I awoke the following day, ready to woo a lady. One lady in particular actually, and her name was Miss Charm. So with a bit of faith and a bit of courage, I sparked up a conversation with her. I decided to ask her about Snake, and she gave me some fake coins to throw at him, and asked to report back to her how he reacted. I'll be honest, that's not how I saw the conversation going. But anyway, I headed over to the church basement to do some work at the study table, and studied up on my stone grave fences, which gave me some much needed blue tick points. Later on that evening, Donkey had dumped another body for us, so I went to see if I could use my newly constructed resurrection table. And yeah, it takes about 10 faith per body, which I don't quite have just yet. So I took care of it before heading home to bed. It's funny number day! Yay! But there were no antics to be had today. I spent the morning purchasing grape seeds from the merchant, which I planted up at the vineyard in hopes of growing enough grapes for all the wine I needed to brew. I then built a scroll shelf in the church basement that afternoon to hold my growing collection of stories, and just before bed I was able to bury another body in the graveyard. With that sneaky snake back today, I took the opportunity on day 70 to throw some fake coins in his face, which he really didn't seem to be bothered by, which is a bit disappointing. But it seemed if I got those bloody nails and bucket of blood, I'd be able to get a few quest items from him. But I wasn't fancying a dungeon run just yet, so instead I cleared some bushes in the graveyard for a few more green tech points so I could unlock the stone carving technology. I worked that night into day 71, revamping my workyard by removing the wooden anvil and stone cutter station. After a quick nap, I regained some energy and got back to work. I finally got rid of my old furnace so I could build the stone cutter 2 station in its place. This was so I could finally make some polished brick of stone. And if you remember correctly, I needed polished bricks of stone for the alchemy mill in the church basement. Back at home that night, I found out I could make graphite from coal in my furnace, and as I went to sleep that night, I was seeing all the pieces fall into place. That combo prayer was as good as mine. Waking up the next morning, I snatched some graphite that had smelted overnight and waddled over to the church basement. All I had to do was study the graphite. God damn it, man. Give me a break. Oh, come on. Sorry about that. Anyway, my storage was a bit full, so I ended up having to build another trunk in my work yard. And then I kinda lost the motivation to do anything, so I stared into the fiery opening of my furnace, even when it started to rain, and even into the nighttime. Thank goodness day 73 was a new day, and lucky for me, another Sunday. I performed my famous sermon and was showered in faith and donations. Much to my delight, I now had lots of faith, so back I went to the church basement to get my study on. Once I had studied the graphite, I turned it into graphite powder at the Alchemy mill. Then shortly after, at the Alchemy workbench, I used the powder and water to make black paint. I had to take some time to wait for my conical flask to finish melting in the furnace, before returning to the church as the days rolled over and into day 74. At the workbench, I used all of these materials to make some ink. Unfortunately for me, I was lacking feathers, so as the morning sun rose on the village, I went in search of some. Fortunately, I remembered about the chicken farm vendor, naturally a basket of eggs, and purchased myself 3 feathers. Racing back home via the tunnels, I made it back to the church where I got to work crafting the pen and ink, making notes at the desk, and turning those notes into chapters. I was so close, but the day was drawing to a close, so I headed to bed for some much needed sleep. I spent day 75 working on my winemaking endeavours by harvesting my grapes, buying more grape seeds from our pal the merchant, building a trunk for the vineyard, and planting more grape seeds. The following day I ventured far out into the swamp to pay Clotho a visit. I was hoping to trade with her, but due to the lack of her memory I wasn't able to just yet. I paid Cresvold a visit in hopes he could sell me a cauldron, but that was locked behind tier 2. Stretched for ideas, I decided to throw myself into the dungeon and see what the hubbub was all about. Hey, wait a minute. That's exactly what I need. So that evening I wandered my way back over to the swamp and handed over the healing potion. And hallelujah, Clotho was back in business. I purchased an apple tree sapling off her and headed back home. This was so I could grow apples for Donkey's lucrative revolution operation. So I removed these trees to clear up the garden space, which actually filled up my log pile, so bonus, and planted my first apple tree. Day 77 I pretty much spent clearing out the first level of the dungeon. I was down here the whole day fighting off slimes and bats, and after a day's worth of adventuring, I made it to level 2. I immediately made my way to the astrologer on the morning of day 78, and that was so I could purchase a soft cover from him. I then used the cover back in the church basement to craft a book with the chapters, and damn it, look how close I am, just 3 little bits of faith and I have it. Alas, I'd have to wait, which I wasn't too happy about. To distract myself, I paid the quarry a visit to check up on our friend Ferdinand. It seemed he'd been working hard at the mines, so I changed up his job and put him on the porter station, which it seems makes them walk to and fro my home dropping off the goods. So I teleported home, but in waiting for him to arrive, I got distracted with the prospect of building a meditation garden, and off I went to get the materials for it. But I did catch Ferdinand on his way back though, but I don't think he dropped anything off, which was kinda weird. But I built my meditation garden, so that's fun. With my mind at peace from a night of meditation, I headed to the church and performed the usual Sunday sermon. And here it was, the moment I'd been working so hard for. I finally crafted the combo prayer. I put it safely in the church trunk, so I didn't do anything dumb with it. To finish off the day, I walked beside Ferdinand on his trig to see what his deal was. Again, he didn't deliver anything, so I grabbed him, and he dropped some slabs. I had a feeling that was because I didn't have any stockpiles, so he wasn't dropping them off. I worked into the night as day 79 turned into day 80, and I finally extended my workyard space. As the rain started to pour down, I got to clearing out any trees and stone that were on my yard. Later on in the day, I remembered Miss Charm was back at the dead horse, and I told her about Snake's reaction to the fake money. In an outrage, she asked me to get the money back, and if I couldn't, to get her mother's necklace instead. Also, apparently the necklace could bring the wearer true love, but she sold it for a chance to sing in front of the king. Sounds like that's on you, babes. Back at home that evening, I made Ferdinand happy by building a stone and iron stockpile just for him. And yes, okay, this may seem like I'm asserting dominance, but I can assure you, I was honestly just trying to figure out what to do with him. I started the next day in the forest, building a whole sawmill by this gigantic tree. I think I found a job for Ferdinand, so I hauled my friend to the sawmill and put him to work. Look at him go. Afterwards, I popped by the vineyard to harvest my grapes and replant the seeds I'd got from picking them. Down in the cellar, I then turned some of my grapes into a pail of grape juice. Unfortunately, I'd need 2 buckets in order to ferment the juice into wine, so I decided to meditate my troubles away. I found Snake on day 82 and tried to ask him about the necklace Miss Charm had asked me to retrieve, but he wasn't giving up that information easily, so I'd have to gain more of his trust. Instead, I spent the entire day making my way through another dungeon level, fighting off pesky bats and slimes. My apple tree had blossomed the following morning and I picked a whole 15 apples off my tree, so I put 5 in the donkey's contraband box. As for the rest of the day, I honestly can't say too much happened. I crafted some more paper out of bat wings I'd gotten from the dungeon, spent a bit of time at the study table gaining some valuable knowledge, and filled Donkey's crate full of more carrots. So let's move on to day 84. I paid the farmer another visit to purchase some more flour, which I used back home to cook some bread for energy before diving down the dungeon again. Here is where I found a new bug to slay, which I honestly just believe are flies, but they drop lots of different types of powder, so that's fun. I got part way through level 3, but decided to dip out early since I didn't have enough energy nor food to replenish it. Day 85 was the first time I got to use my combo prayer, so I read out a banger sermon to my subjects and was rewarded with a bit more faith and a lot more donations. Look at all those suckers. I mean, lovely people who just want to show their appreciation. The rest of my day was taken up fumbling around with a body in the morgue that I wasn't too sure what to do with, being sad my grapes hadn't grown, and trying to finish off level 3 in the dungeon. And as the days rolled on to day 86, I died to a fly. Do I want to talk about it? No. Not really. So let's pretend that never happened and say, yay, I finished level 3 with 0 complications whatsoever. That morning I did some gardening and harvested some wheat and beets I had been growing before building up another trunk, since my first one was getting a bit full. I then passed Donkey on the way to harvest some more grapes, and passed him on the way back, but I couldn't be bothered with dealing another body, so I shoved it into the double pallet with the other one. With those grapes I was able to squeeze out another bucket of grape juice, and now that I had 2, I could make some wine in my massive barrel. The next day I was back to the dungeon, however level 4 brought a new scary enemy called Iron Maidens. They took some strategy to slay, just kind of dodging out the way, however they dropped me bloody nails, which is exactly what I needed to give to Snake. I thought I was doing pretty well until I got sliced one too many times and died again. Good thing I'm immortal though. On a better note, my wine had finished fermenting and I now had a whole 20 bottles of it. I began day 88 visiting Snake and handing him some bloody nails I had gathered. In return, he was able to give me a pass into the town. My first order of business was to craft a cookbook, so down in the church basement I made one at my desk, which I then placed in the contraband box. Next I was off to the Dead Horse, but unfortunately for me I had made bronze quality wine and Wagner was clearly a man of quality. While I was in the village I used my town pass to enter town, but I was struck down by lightning on what I can only describe as a beautiful sunny day. I smell foul play. Jerry was waiting for me back home, who exclaimed it seemed a higher power didn't want me visiting the town. No Jerry, but he did tell me to visit Snake and tell him about it. So I did, and he said if I helped him, he'd help me, and back down into the dungeon I went. I continued on to day 89 as I eventually made it through level 4 and onto level 5 in the dungeons. Thanks to the wine I was able to regen both energy and health, and I got to mine some silver nuggets while I was there. After a while of adventuring, slaying bats, bugs and slimes, I made it to a large room with a chest in it where I received a bucket of blood. You know, usually I wouldn't be stoked getting a bucket of blood, but it was too bad because Snake's gone now, but that's okay, I'll just have to wait another week. After a long day of dungeon exploring, I headed home and to bed. I woke up on day 90 and found a note in the contraband box left by Donkey titled Revolutionary Message 1. As I read it, I found out they appreciated the gifts, but the rat chef ate the cookbook and the apples made the donkeys fight between themselves. So for the next task, I was asked to send them anti-money aphorisms and 5 faith. I assumed to help them work better together. So with not much else to do, I wrote the anti-money aphorisms in the church basement and gathered up 5 faith from my trunk, both of which I shoved into the contraband box. I then decided to finally do something with the bodies I had been neglecting in the morgue by removing their skin and dumping them both in the river. You're useless to me now. Back at the contraband box, Donkey had delivered a bank statement and some jewellery. Although I wasn't too sure what to do with these, so I built another trunk in the workyard, moved all the monster loot and body parts to the new trunk, and finally placed the random quest stuff in the trunk at the foot of my bed, which is probably a bit yucky from holding brains and stuff, but I'm sure it's fine. The next morning I popped by the contraband box again and found a second revolutionary message waiting for me. It turns out the anti-money aphorisms and faith had been a success amongst the donkeys. I was then tasked to assemble and deliver horseshoes and iron unicorn horns, and also a magical pumpkin, so they can turn it into a carriage, then at the right time it'll turn back into a pumpkin, so their master will look like an idiot. Before I could get working on all of that though, it was time for another Sunday sermon. After collecting all of the donations, I paid a visit to the dead horse where I sold the remainder of my wine to Herodric. I did this because I needed a lot of silver in order to purchase that building permission from the Royal Services box, which I handed over to the bishop. Oh god, that was quick. Inside the new church, the bishop explained to me that in order to perform a ceremony in the big church, I'll need to be a rightful citizen. Outside in the Royal Services box, I checked it out and it cost 3 silver. Man, I just spent 20 to get the building permit. What more do you want from me? To add insult to injury, I unlocked the softness of faith technology to see if I could upgrade my church benches, but I couldn't even make them, so I sulked my way back home to sleep. I began day 92 at the refugee camp, and Marcus told me that the refugees were too frightened to leave and needed help around the camp. I then asked how the camp dynamics work. Basically, refugee happiness means I can build more things for them, and I get refugee happiness from keeping them hydrated and fed. However, before I can make a start on that, I paid the Gypsy Baron a visit with those fish fillets he asked for ages ago, and I got the recipe to make those delicious smelling kebabs. Later that afternoon, I returned to the camp and built them a well, which will hopefully be a good start to a thriving camp. Back home that night, I wandered through the rain over to the church and got to studying a bunch of items for some red tech points. Outside, I found our old friend Yorick, who told me he was elected to superintendent of the graveyard. I'm not sure why he wanted to tell me that, but I appreciate it. I spent all of day 93 attempting to bring Cresfold items that I thought he could turn into battle armor for the Donkey Revolution. Not once, but twice. And then I tried seeing if he'd buy my metal scrap. He did not. Day 94, I handed Snake that bucket of blood I'd been holding on to for a week now, and using what I'd given him, he made me watch him perform a summoning. Well, I don't think that went to plan. Turns out it hadn't, and Snake asked me to speak with the astrologer to find a book called the Necronomicon. Necronomicon? You know, it's a special book. He also let me take a royal stamp from him too, which I then handed to Herodric at the tavern. Back in the workyard that afternoon, I crafted myself some iron armor to help protect me from the dangers of the dungeon, before spending some time fishing at a different part of the river. I started day 95 with a few chores, smelting some iron, picking apples off my apple tree, and moving some logs I'd cut down ages ago to the log pile. Up at Witch Hill, I made an attempt to see the portal, but was stopped by the Inquisitor's guards. Turns out the Inquisitor had a bad dream he'd be ambushed up here by cultists, so I'd have to find a way to make them leave. But that was a problem for another day. Instead, I harvested some grapes and cleared out this massive log, giving me easy access to the vineyard from my home. Day 96, I spent in the workyard making a whole bunch of iron parts and wooden planks so that I could build another confession booth in the church. And that night, I unlocked the circular saw technology, which I built over in my workyard. Day 97, thanks to the circular saw, I was able to build a wooden shrine in the church. But I'd forgotten that I couldn't perform sermons without the citizenship papers, and I was very sad. So instead of performing a sermon today, I built up a second wooden shrine in the church and paid the farmer a visit. You see, I was supposed to get carrot seeds to plant, so I would have some carrots to get Donkey to bring me bodies, which I could burn for burial certificates and sell to Herodric in order to buy the citizenship papers. But that all went down the drain when I bought actual carrots instead of seeds.
You just blowing from Stupid Town?
It wasn't until I got home I realized my dumb mistake. Looking back, it's quite funny, but at the time I was rightly quite pissed off. So much so that I stood in the garden for a while not doing anything. Day 98, I was back to trying to make money by squeezing apples into apple juice with my vine press. But the barrel only makes wine, and would you look at that? It's a whole nother technology to make a bottle of apple ferment. I think my luck has hit rock bottom. But anyway, I took off to the swamp and finished the day picking some hiccup grass for the merchant and clearing out the rubble between the cellar and the church basement. Day 99, I handed over the hiccup grass to the merchant, which I think to no one's surprise ended up making things worse, and the merchant was left without taste. He explained to me that he had a curse put on him from an older woman at an oasis when he was caravanning across the northern mountains. So I agreed to talk to Clotho to see what we could do. Clotho told me that unfortunately curses put on people cannot be undone by other witches. She even called it unprofessional. But but she said I could help by using my alchemy skills, so I left it at that. To finish off the day, I cleared the other 2 debris pile-ups, giving me quick access in the tunnels between the morgue to the church basement and to the cellar. And here we are on day 100. Now, I'll be honest with you, I kinda got the days mixed up while recording, and in all honesty, I thought this was day 99, so I'm still working pretty hard. Anyway, I had a convo with Snake about retrieving this necklace for Miss Charm, and he explained to me that if I was able to make an ointment for the Lord's servant called Kokol, who resides in the big fort I passed ages ago, I might have a chance at retrieving that necklace. So I took some restoration tools off of Snake and decided I'll look for the necklace later. Instead, I made another pail of grape juice at the vine press, planted some carrots, and stood watching over them as night came. As I went to bed that night, the questions rang in my ears. Will I get control of the church back? How will I become the ultimate graveyard keeper? Can I make it back home through the portal to my one true love? Questions that can only be answered in part 2. Well, there you have it. That has been 100 days of Graveyard Keeper. I've had an absolute blast playing through this game, and if you want to see part 2 and another 200 days, then make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I know you want more. Make sure to check out my Discord, and if you've watched to the end, then thank you very much for doing so. And as always, you're all wonderful people, so have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching.